Hello. Thank you so much for being here with us today. As Oliver mentioned, Micromobility Industries is launching a new brand called Ride AI to explore forms of the ways in which mobility is becoming smarter beyond just the world of micromobility. So if you have broader interests, we hope you'll check out the Ride AI podcast and newsletter. And today we have, I think, a really fascinating conversation, a fascinating person I've had the pleasure of speaking with a bit already. And I think, luckily, this is not going to take us too far from the topics of micromobility that we've been discussing on this stage today. Crijn Bouman, first of all, tell us a little bit about your company, ROCSYS, and we'll get to there. We're going to go through your past a little bit, but right now, what do you do?
Yeah, so basically we automate charging of electric vehicles with robots, which sounds very futuristic. So we're mainly focused on automating charging for cars, trucks, heavy-duty vehicles. And I have a long background in e-mobility, and that's actually where the company came from.
Yeah. So before ROCSYS, you had a company called Epyon, but I want to go back to the very beginning of your involvement in electric mobility, because it goes way back. You've been doing this a while. Tell us, what was the first electric vehicle that you got kind of pulled in by?
Yeah, so it was actually an electric vehicle built by a guy maybe some people in the audience know is Wietse van Mansum. He's the designer of the Urban Aero cargo bike. He's a personal friend. And I was in university. This was around 2002. And he had a job as a food delivery for delivering food to people's houses. At that time, that was not like now with apps and all stuff. It was all like phones, and you had to call and people come. And he figured out that, doing this by car is not really a good business because there's traffic jams everywhere. So he decided to do that on a bike, which is very normal now. But at 2002, this was quite new. And then he switched from car to bike, and then he basically decided I need a faster bike. So he bought some motors on the internet and built his own electric bike in 2002. And so he could basically go on the sidewalk and go fast. And at one moment I was at his house and he showed me the electric bike, and I was like, so you can actually build an electric vehicle. And that sort of got me started in the whole e-mobility domain. I was just fascinated by this electric vehicle, self-built electric vehicle. It's just completely blown my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love these pioneering stories from the early frontier days, right? So what was it about charging though, right? So you didn't go out and build your own bike. Obviously your friend was quite good at that, became quite famous for that. So you didn't compete with him. Instead you went into charging. Why charging?
Yeah, so actually we were, so due to this experience, I got engaged into the electric vehicle community so we're talking like 2004, 2005. There were some enthusiasts, mainly, for example, in Los Angeles, in California, and also in Europe, there were a couple of enthusiasts building electric cars at small scale. So I got engaged in that community, and I really started to look at like, okay, there's quite a few things going on. There's like this smaller companies retrofitting gas cars to electric. And you also saw some bigger manufacturers looking into the possibility of electric vehicles. But also the charging question always came up. And at that time, there was the rise of the lithium-ion battery. And there were the possibility for fast charging, which was not really known. So I thought like, okay, the big problem of an electric vehicle is basically the charge time, especially if you look at passenger cars. Charging time is just a bottleneck because people are used to gas stations. So and then I thought like fast charging is really key to get electric vehicles to be adopted by mainstream, and that's actually how my previous company Epyon got started, building fast chargers in 2005. We started.
Yeah. So 2005, I mean, fast charging, there was not a lot of that going on in 2005 either. And what's interesting though, is that, right, so you talked about this community of EV enthusiasts, and a lot of the focus of that community was building sports cars and building consumer facing vehicles. But Epyon actually got its start not in consumer facing vehicles. You were fast charging a different kind of vehicle. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so actually, indeed, like the community of electric vehicle enthusiasts was in LA, Alan Coney building the T0 and all this, and of course there needs to be a business case, and so we basically had the idea like, okay, this is where it's going, but we need to get from A to B to C, and then we ended up working more for like vehicles used in airports, ground service equipment, and forklifts, where electric vehicles already had a business case. And then in the 24-hour and 16-hour operations, fast charging is a huge benefit because you can basically charge the vehicle in the lunch break instead of buying 2 or 3 vehicles. So that's actually how we funded the company, how we initially got started to develop a solution for airports mainly.
Yeah, so because when you go from an 8-hour charge time to 30-minute, 40-minute charge time, then all of a sudden you can buy half the vehicles?
Yeah, so usually in many of these operations, if it's 24 hours, they have 3 vehicles for the shifts, or they have swappable batteries, which you also need to buy multiple swappable batteries, and you need a special room where they are charged and all this stuff. And our formula was just, charge in the brake, and then you can do everything with one vehicle. And that was very novel at that time. And that's how Epyon got started as a company.
Yeah, I find it so fascinating because, we're all consumers, and so we all tend to focus so much on the consumer use cases for whether it's electrification or automation, which we'll talk about a little bit more. And yet so often it's these kind of out of the way, behind the, things use cases that people aren't looking at, aren't thinking about, but there are these opportunities to cut a charge time in half and cut the capital expenditure for a fleet, and all of a sudden, it may be small, it may not have an infinite TAM, but that's where you get started, right?
Absolutely. But I think that's critical to a startup, that you need to have a big vision, but the most complicated thing is to develop like a from A to B to C kind of plan, how to get to the next step, and in every step, earn money which can fund your next development, but also incorporate all the lessons you learned and build your technology stack, your organization, because you also need to build an organization to have an impact. And to build an organization, you need to have customers, because you of course you can continue doing R&D, but I always believe you need to get to the market as fast as possible, because that's when people need to pay money for something. That's when you really start to develop the things people need. Yeah, basically. So that's indeed, I think it's crucial to start in a niche market where you can develop your organization and your technology and your processes, etc.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, and I didn't plan this question, but were you venture capital funded, or what was? Because so often it feels like in modern venture capital, you kind of have to swing for the fences right out the gate, and always have that. You don't always get that kind of patient approach to kind of do a stage development of a company, which I think is often very important. Who was funding you?
Yeah, so in Epyon we were venture funded indeed, but this was not like today. It's relatively luxury. There are a lot of venture capital available and venture funds. Back in 2005 there were not so many. So the initial 2-3 years we were sort of mainly self-funded, also with smaller customer orders, etc. And in 2008, we raised our first significant round. Yeah, that's when we became venture funded.
Yeah. And okay, so 2008, right? So what Tesla Roadster is just sort of coming out, right?
Yes.
So and this is the point at which you then take the next step and go beyond just these the airport vehicles and start building a wider range of chargers. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So basically, so we still had the dream of going to mainstream mobility. And somewhere 2009, we got the rumors that Nissan in Japan was developing the Nissan Leaf, the electric Nissan. And then also at the same time, Tesla Roadster came out, and there were rumors about the Model S. Then we actually hired a person in Japan to figure out what's going on with Nissan. And then we learned about their car, and we decided to develop a charger for that car. And then Nissan got heard about us, and they approached us because they were looking for launch partners for the electric car in Europe, because there was no charging network, and we were one of the few companies worldwide they found who could actually do fast charging So that's when we started to develop the 50 kilowatt CHAdeMO fast charger for the Nissan car. And that when the Nissan car actually came to Europe and also the Tesla Roadster, this is where the company really took off, because that was like a complete greenfield market. There were almost no solutions available. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's been fascinating over the years to see there's been a lot of startups with brilliant ideas and cool tech and things, but breaking into the automotive ecosystem is always kind of presents unique challenges. Obviously, huge, often century-old companies with all these ways of doing things and gatekeepers and getting on purchasing, lists and approvals. And tell us a little bit about that experience and what you learned about bringing a software into a massive established ecosystem like that.
Yeah, so I think that you see it everywhere now, still in the automotive industry, that these companies, it's a stamina game. You need to be, it's a decades game. The cycle of a car is about 10 years. So basically, it's 3 to 4 years development. Then the car is launched. Then after 3 years, there's a facelift, and then the car is sold again for 3 years, and then there's a new model. So it's a 10-year cycle, and you need this cycle because it's so cash intensive. Basically, the investment in a new car is between 1 and 2 billion. So you need to earn that money back, and the margins are only like 10% on a car. So you don't earn it back easily. So there's like a very slow moving cycle, and you need to break into that. And that's been a challenge always. That who is the fast mover, and are they really incentivized to make electric cars a success? Many of them were not at that time, and still I think many companies, also the business logic just says that they're good at combustion cars, so why change a winning formula? So it's always been a challenge. And then there is a contender like Tesla, and at that time you had Carlos Ghosn at Nissan basically said, we are going all in on this. And yeah, then you have a contender, and then a competitive situation starts, and others also going to look at it. But
well, and also there's, car companies, going back to Henry Ford, he very famously, there were no gas stations when the Model T really started to scale the automobile in the US. And people tried to get him to go into the gas business, and he absolutely refused to do it. And to this day, you see a lot of car companies, this is baked really deeply in their DNA. Is this something as a partner to these companies, was that helpful? Was it a challenge?
Yeah, that was actually the gap we jumped in, because at some point most car makers realized to make the car a success, they need a charging solution. And we made the fast charging solution, at least, and the fast charging was crucial to success. So yeah, we basically could partner very well with the car OEMs.
So, and then ultimately, Epyon was purchased by a company that probably most people have heard of, ABB.
Yes.
What were they purchasing? What was it that attracted them to Epyon? And
Yeah. So I would say at that moment there were only few companies, but there was the visibility to like this countrywide fast charging networks. The first one was actually in Estonia. The government decided to build a nationwide wide fast charging network for cars. And that sort of opened the eyes of the ABBs, the Siemens, etc. That, hey, this is going to be like a nationwide infrastructure type business. We want to be in that business. And of course, nobody had the product, but we had the product. So.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting how often, sort of a government taking a step like that has these ripple effects, right?
Absolutely.
Throughout the ecosystem.
Yeah, and also they saw that more and more car makers are sort of looking into the electric vehicle space, and yeah.
Yeah, and so what did that acquisition by ABB? What did it allow you to do? Obviously, huge amount of resources compared to being a little start off on your own, but sort of what possibilities did that open up?
Yeah, I would say so. The big benefit of being acquired by ABB was that all of a sudden we had a service network worldwide, which was a big benefit. We could remove the first slide from our slide deck, which was always like, hey, you small company, how credible are you? So basically you put the logo there and everybody's like, okay, these people have money. We don't need to worry, because our customers were mainly big established players, and they are always doing a lot of scrutiny on the company itself.
Yeah.
I mean, big companies are usually good at, of course, credibility. Most of big companies are good at scaling a incremental innovation. Most big companies are terrible at a new, wild, innovative type of solution and trying to make that successful, like a new product in a new market, which is still very small, very, I would say majority of big companies completely fail because none of the processes in a big company are set up to make that successful. I also learned that along the way. There's a very good book about this, Innovator's Dilemma, by Clayton Christensen. But, all the incentives are to make the next quarter successful. So if you're coming with this innovation, which is going to change the planet, but doesn't make the next quarter better, that's an uphill battle from day one.
Yeah. No, and if you look at the way you started, I mean, starting with airport vehicles and that sort of very specific opportunity, and then moving to vehicle, it's hard to imagine a big sort of infrastructure-oriented company taking that kind of step-by-step approach, which was what was needed to build that momentum, right?
Yeah, I think that's also the trick of like a high-tech startup, that on the one hand, you have to keep these two realities in your mind, basically the big vision and the humble step you take today, and combine that for, especially in a hardware startup, like a 5 to 10 year, at least software is faster usually. You have to continuously merge these two realities and make them grow closer together. And the structure in a big company is not set up like this. Everybody's focused on the next quarter or the year results, or
Yeah, but so once you were there, though, you were able to then quickly, go from 50 kilowatt hour, 150, 300. I mean, so you were able to take what you were already doing and bring it up, not revolutionize it, right? But
yeah.
And the resources that they brought to the table.
Yeah, basically when we were acquired, we had the first, second generation of the 50 kilowatt charger, which was for mainly the smaller cars. And then, indeed, the portfolio was expanded with 100 kilowatt plus, 150, 300 kilowatts, so it's faster and faster and faster, which is a bit incremental innovation, although there were a lot of humps down the road we had to take. So, so we really built a whole portfolio. I stayed for 6 years. It was a great experience because the e-mobility business is just one of the nicest businesses in the world. I think it's very innovative. You meet nice people. Everybody's looking for a better future, so that's super great.
Yeah, and ABB is one of the huge names in EV charging now.
Still,
best respected. Yeah, absolutely. And yet, like a crazy person, you decided to leave and start all over again. And that brings us to your current company, ROCSYS.
Yeah.
I mean, look, you sold a company to ABB again, like big prestigious name, at the top of the heap, really. Anything you wanted to do in charging, you could have done there, and yet you left to do something new. Why? Take us inside that decision.
I think it's a combination of two things. One was I was missing the entrepreneurial spirit a bit because it became more and more incremental and just scaling exercise. But in my second to last year at ABB, I had a very interesting experience. We had a customer in California, and they bought a bunch of fast chargers, and they didn't want to say what they were doing with them. So we're like, that's intriguing. So I decided my next trip to California, let's go there. And so I went to this place, and it was like a warehouse with no logo. There was nothing there which identified the company name. So I went in, I met my contact person there, and we were walking in this warehouse, and inside the warehouse, there was a test track for autonomous vehicles. And there were just automated vehicles driving inside the warehouse because the company had no permit to drive on public roads. So they just built an indoor test setup. And it's just like walking into the future. You come to this warehouse and you see robotaxis driving around inside the building with no driver. And so they were doing the test rounds, and then at the end of the test rounds, they parked themselves in a corner, and a person would walk out from a desk and would plug in the vehicle. So I was like, okay, that's fascinating. So they bought the fast chargers to charge the vehicles quickly so they could do more test rounds. And the person was constantly walking back and forth to plug in the vehicles. And I was like, okay, you can automate a vehicle, but charging is still manual. Sort of like, and then the person explained to me that the management told them that let's focus on the vehicle first, all the rest comes later, because we need to be ready to, when we get the permit to test on public roads, we basically need to be ready. So that's the first priority, all the rest comes later. And that idea just stuck with me.
Yeah.
And after I left ABB, I met a couple of people working on robotics technology, and Joost and Kanter, they are my co-founders of ROCSYS, and basically in our discussion we came to the idea like, okay, robotics is also at a massive, robotics and AI is a massive growth trajectory. These technologies are becoming better and better, cheaper, etc. We can actually solve the problem with robots. So if automated vehicles come to the road, a robotic arm can just plug it in, and that technology will be very affordable and very good in the future. So that's how ROCSYS got started, basically.
Yeah, and there's an interesting parallel with the where you got started with aircraft, recharging aircraft vehicles or airport maintenance vehicles. In the sense that robotaxis are incredibly capital intensive, right? Like all automation,
absolutely,
you're trading more upfront cost, right, for your ultimately lower operating cost. As a result, the whole game in terms of making money is about utilization, right? It's about uptime. And so once again, you found a business where shortening and making more efficient that charging time and process results in actual real dollars and cents.
Yeah, so I think there are quite some parallels indeed. So basically the vision behind ROCSYS is that mobility as we know it today is basically broken. We are dealing with the climate crisis, but also every city in the world is clogged up during rush hour, traffic jams everywhere. So this will not work. This paradigm will just not work for the next generation. So we need to get to a more shared car ownership model. Also, I think like this conference is mainly about micromobility. I think that's also absolutely part of the solution. Public transport is as well. But we need to solve the car problem as well. People have a car and the car is standing still for 95% of the time. This makes absolutely no sense. So in order to solve the problem for the bigger mobility spectrum, we need to move to a more shared car ownership model, which is basically electric and autonomous vehicles, where autonomy creates a platform where you can actually share vehicles much better. So the big picture is that, you know, this is where the world will move. We at some point vehicles will start to drive and park themselves. But of course, we need to start very humble, and we are building the infrastructure for the future of charging infrastructure, which is the fully automated charging infrastructure. But that's already delivering value today in like a more niche market. So today we are focused on ports and logistics, and our solutions are used to power the vehicles in the logistic chain, which are supporting delivering goods to your doorstep, basically. So the automated vehicles which are already there in ports, in a behind the fence application in logistics. So there's a parallel to Appion, basically. We start in the use case where we can learn where it makes sense today, but the robotaxi is not that far. In Europe, yes, maybe a bit further out than North America and also China, but it's going.
Yeah, and some of the technologies, as you were saying, that power autonomous vehicles, that allow computers to drive vehicles, are also what allow your robots to charge them.
Absolutely.
And help people understand a little bit. This is not like the charger's not built in. This is a robot that you put a charger onto. Talk a little bit about the technology and the sort of form factor of these robots.
Yeah, so the basic principles when we started the company was we do not want to change the vehicles and also not the chargers, because that is a very difficult go to market. But also, billions and billions of money go into building charging infrastructure today, which is there for people. It would be a waste if we have to throw that out in the next 2 decades for supporting the next wave in mobility. So basically we said, don't change the vehicle, don't change the charging infrastructure, but just solve the gap, which is the charging gap is basically the connection to the vehicle. So indeed, basically you take the cable of a charger, you mount it to the robot, and the robotic arm can basically make the connection. As vehicle parked, the arm comes out and basically connects your vehicle, or picks up the charging gun and connects it to your vehicle.
And it uses this really interesting mix. So you use cameras to locate the port, but then I've seen a demo of this. Unfortunately we don't have video of it, but it really, there's almost like a tactile feel element to it, and it's fascinating to see a robot do something. When you plug in an EV, we don't think about it. We just sort of do it. But there is there's the tactile aspect of it. And when you see it automated, you're like, oh yeah, that is happening. I didn't even think about it, but you have to think these things through when you're automating things. So tell us a little bit about how that works.
Yeah, so one of my co-founders, Joost, he actually comes from the biomechanical robot space, which is exoskeletons and prosthesis, orthosis, and the more fancy Boston Dynamics type stuff. So humanoid robots as well. So we basically mimic the motion or we mimic how a person would do it. So if we were to insert a plug, we basically look more or less for the target. We pick up the connector. We aim more or less for the hole, and when we feel by tactile feedback that you're in the right spot, you basically push it in, and that's exactly how the technology works. Basically, so we use tactile feedback, combination of cameras and tactile feedback to navigate and insert a connector, just like humans.
Yeah. So autonomous vehicles, robotaxis, there's been so much talk about it, and sometimes it feels, I think, for a lot of people that it is all just sort of talk, but certainly if you go to San Francisco, I've been able to go there and ride on the Waymo robotaxis, and it's very real. It is, it's not everywhere. It's not replacing cars everywhere. But as in terms of a proof of concept, San Francisco is an incredibly chaotic city. Anything that you could imagine seeing on the road, you see there somewhere.
Yeah.
And so this is real. But the last time I was in San Francisco, I kind of randomly, I won't name the name of the company. You'll probably guess because they're the major ones operating there. I walked past this parking lot that was normally like fenced off, but the fence was open, and there were all these robotaxis sitting there. They weren't being cleaned, they weren't being charged, they were just sort of sitting there, and it was sort of this moment where it's like, okay, so proof of concept, this is real. The hard part now for robotaxis is how do we make this into a business?
Yes.
Right? We spent a lot of time and a lot of money showing that it can be done and learning how it can be done. How does charging strategy and sort of the depot strategy, the infrastructure support, how do you see that enabling profitable robotaxis?
So yeah, indeed, I think this will be a super competitive industry, also with the Chinese entering this game. So not only the vehicle needs to be good, but the whole concept, including recharging. Most companies started off with building like very big hubs, like Cruise and Waymo. They built large charging hubs, which makes a lot of sense because you also need to do the cleaning, you need to do the inspection, and sometimes the calibration of the vehicle. So that's all centralized in the big hub. But if you look from, let's say, if you were to address a city like Los Angeles with robotaxis, if you would have like 4 big hubs, it creates a lot of transit time, because when a vehicle's empty, you need to drive all the way to the hub to charge, which might be at the other end of the city, which might be in Los Angeles an hour away, and in rush hour maybe 2 hours away. So if you look more from the perspective of a competitive service, they probably more benefit from a fine-grained network of charging. So let's say our philosophy for this business is, yes, you're going to need a backbone of 3-4 big hubs for all the key functions, but then you would like to have a fine-grained network with smaller hubs everywhere around the city where you can choose to either pick up a passenger or charge. And that will be sort of a mobile smart grid where you make the trade-off between like, what's the price of energy, which rides can I pick up, etc. It will be like a very much part of the optimization formula for that business. So the more fine grain it is, the better, because then you can make a really dynamic trade-off and earn money, and that makes the business successful.
Yeah, and you really, I think at a certain point, the city and the vehicles that are moving around it kind of become one in that kind of distributed type of system, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So you need both. You need a backbone of big hubs, but also you need the fine grain. And with automation, that's possible, because you can just put like 2 or 3 charging stalls with a robotic arm and automatically connect the vehicles.
And you don't need all of the other things that a toilet for the person who's attending it and all that other stuff. Yeah. This has been fascinating as always. Crijn Bouman, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ed.